Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. One of the things that took me many years to discover but was a game changer once I did was what I think of as delicious yin. And so what I mean by that is when you're in stillness or contemplation, it's the feeling of sitting outside enjoying the sunset or the afternoon sunshine on your face, or curling up with a good book. And for me, there's always been a little bit of an argument between the yin and the yang. So the yang being the active, doing, accomplishing, productivity, working on your goals kind of energy, and the yin being more about stillness and internal and deep contemplation and richness and substance. As a young person growing up, one of my survival, get approval, be safe, be well in the world, meet needs kind of strategies was the good girl and the perfectionist and the people pleaser and the overachiever. And because I was really socially awkward, I wasn't always pleasing to people, but I could rock it academically. So I did a really good job of getting consistently high grades and going the extra mile and behaving well in class, following all the rules. Give me a rule, I was going to follow it within school and other structures. And the challenge with that was that when you're moving in that way, there's never an enough switch. You never achieve enough to really feel like, yeah, that's awesome. That's enough. That's adequate. I have achieved everything I need to achieve that's in alignment with my goals. There's sort of an ongoing more kind of feeling to that. And one of the cycles I remember really vividly from growing up was that I would overachieve, and so I had a ridiculous number of extracurricular activities in addition to those straight A's and accelerated classes. So I was in the few AP classes my rural high school had, and then I took college courses once I completed the run in English or math. And on top of that, I was in 4-H. I was an all-star, if you know what that is. Lots of animal husbandry skills that I use not at all in my adult life, but I had a whole herd of goats that I was milking and caring for, as well as, chores around the farm. I was in dance, I was in drama, I was in band. I wasn't very good at any of those things, but I was showing up. My parents were like, that'll look good on your college resume. And so I had a rather intense amount that I was committed to and doing as a 14 to 17-year-old, and it still wasn't enough. I still had that perfectionism and a lot of anxiety and tension, and activation was covering up a lot of emotionality. So one of the ways that I dealt with the fact that I really didn't have a good set of tools for dealing with emotionality was to just try to be more of a perfectionist and get more approval. Somehow that was going to work out. And from time to time, this house of cards would come crashing down. So one of my patterns was to kind of push myself until I got a head cold. And then I, being rather whiny about head colds, would just give myself permission to just stop everything. I can't possibly be expected to do anything other than keep the animals alive. The homework will have to wait, the test scores, whatever. And I would have this day or so of just curling up and watching movies and reading a book and letting that overachieving part of my mind have a moment's break. But then the tension would start to creep back, because at some point I would feel a little better, but not better enough to go back to school. And then I would kind of take the time, and this wasn't anything I planned or premeditated, and getting into therapy was super helpful for, interrupting this pattern. But I would start in this very tired place of not being back in motion of a sort of performance evaluation plan. So I would take the time in a way to start reviewing all of my failings and what I was going to do about them when I had more energy. And this was, not a particularly pleasant way to spend time. So the minute my energy was back or the virus was out of my system, back I went right into the thick of all the busyness and all the balls I was holding in the air. And then I went off to UCSD and got a degree in engineering, which was very intense and a lot of the same patterning that was playing through. And over the years, I eventually managed to, get some therapy and do some energetic healing. There was a lot of just release of built up energies in my body, of all the emotions that I suppressed that moved independent of a psychological framework. And that was great. And then I started kind of unwinding perfectionism. So one of my biggest shadows in my 20s was this idea that I was lazy. So I had all this tension around it, and I was constantly trying to prove that I wasn't lazy. And then I read Debbie Ford's book, The Dark Side of Light Chasers, where she suggested that what if I was lazy sometimes and not other times, and that was okay, and I was lazy about some things and not other things. And it was just such a huge relief to stop trying to be something and present as something, and to be able to, have that energy move. Now, I still get tripped up by that sometimes. It's a funny thing, but overall, there's more willingness to be a both and not have so much identity woven into sort of a persona or a picture of myself that I would really like people to see and therefore like me. And spoiler alert, my experience is a lot more people seem to authentically like me when I'm not trying to persuade them so hard that I'm a good and likable person. Better social skills helped a lot with that too. But the upshot of this was I had a lot of my life where I didn't stop running or doing or achieving until I was absolutely depleted in some way. And then often I sort of picked myself up and got back to it when I hadn't really even finished replenishing my energy. And, I tended to amp my energy with all the usual things of caffeine and sugar, particularly fond of sugar for that, because if you're emotionally numbing, the chemical release in your brain with sugar gives you a burst of energy and a mood boost, which was something that I, sort of unconsciously was really leaning on when I was younger, and still provide myself with adult supervision around to this day. But as the years have gone by, I've come to value less the overachieving or being impressive. I think that there's this interesting position where I have enough validation, that not everybody is impressed with me. I mean, for the interesting thing of being a shamanic practitioner, people who understand the richness of what I've put into my vocation may be, really appreciative and impressed. But, somebody else could look at it and say, wow, that is absolutely nutsy, and this girl is cuckoo. So it's this interesting kind of thing. But I have enough people who think I'm cool that the thing that was so hungry for that as an adolescent and someone in her 20s, that part is usually pretty chill, which again, much easier to interface with humans when I'm not trying to feed that part. Certainly, I still prefer that people respond positively to me than the other way around, but there isn't something that can never, ever, ever get enough of it. And that's this huge relief. And there was a lot of inner work, as well as just the maturity of years that went by that helped to inform that. But along the way, my dreams of being the best at something, or really impressive, or accomplishing a goal, or that whole which university am I going to go to, kind of gave way to a desire to just live a really balanced life, to have a healthy body, to have a rich social circle, to have meaning, to have travel, to have time in nature, to have work that I love. And that means kind of not specializing. And I had the interesting experience. I decided to join a mastermind just to kind of help get more inspiration for my business. And being a solo entrepreneur can be a little lonely at times. And I really value the richness of community. So thought this will be great. And I had a really strong talk with myself that my business is doing great. I make enough money in a way that doesn't deplete me. So up-leveling it so I had more money for travel and, more financial security in the future, sure, that's wonderful, but not if it means that I skip a workout because I have an idea I'm inspired by. I'm very aware of how much I love to get into that flow state and go down the rabbit hole and get really focused. And I really love the intellectual challenge and the connection to my guides, and I can neglect the physical. And I'm really wanted to talk with myself about not getting caught up in the how do I get myself to do more at a season in my life when my goal is actually to remember to step away from the computer outside my door into the beautiful hills of San Diego and play with the neighbors' dogs who are making puppy faces at me through the sliding glass door, and to sit and watch the birds do their springtime mating rituals and really allow that deep stillness to sink in. And I think it's something where I always need to keep turning myself back to that because, there's so much in our culture that values doing and accomplishment over being and presence. And so for a balanced life, I need to, really keep checking in with myself. And it's a little complicated because I love what I do. I'm not making myself do something. I'm genuinely inspired, but my inspiration runs deeper, and there's just a lot of quality of life that emerges when I balance the doing with the being, the yin and the yang. And one of the insights I really had that I think is valuable that may not be obvious to someone who's running themselves a little ragged, who's kind of in that busy, full life and needing to hustle a bit. There are times when that's just the reality. If you're earning money and raising children and you have a lot on your plate, life can be really, really full. But one of the things that I found about the process of being in stillness is that there's a completely different quality when you do it proactively for the sake of enriching your life rather than reactively because you're so exhausted you just can't bring yourself to get out of bed without far more harsh self-talk than you're prepared to inflict on yourself at that moment. And so what I would find earlier before I really kind of cleaned out that emotional debt and learned to do a better job not numbing my emotions was that when I went to yin and stillness and curling up with a book and taking it easy and not accomplishing or producing results, I often did that as a last resort when I was just too tired. And when I got too tired, there was all of this numbed emotion that I was also too tired to keep suppressing that came roaring up. And that Saturday where you sit in bed and feel pretty bummed about the world is just not a fun way to spend a Saturday. It's not super appealing. And so there was this avoidance strategy in my overachieving and busyness that I really needed to look at. And so what I've learned, having cleaned out all of that emotional numbing, is that when I cultivate those experiences of pleasurable stillness and I'm not sitting on a stack of emotional tension and pain, I'm not ignoring fear or grief or anger or frustration or helplessness. There isn't something brewing that I really don't want to take a look at, but there's a neutrality to my emotionality and I'm not fatigued. There's such richness to be had in that experience of not committing my energy to a particular purpose or intention or laser focused goal. And I think I'm someone who runs her energy, if you talk about sort of masculine and feminine, I know we're moving away from those terms, but bear with me. The masculine being more that provider, protector, committed to a result, the feminine being more open to possibilities and, caring about beauty and just different ways of moving through the world. And I'm not relating this to human gender, it's more to a state of consciousness that I've heard referred to in those ways. It's useful for me for shorthand to think about whether the masculine and the feminine are playing nice together, because one of the things that happens when these two parts get out of sync is that doing, accomplishing part will try to hold on to the reins way too long. No, 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 just one more thing. Got to get it done. Got to get it done. And I'll keep working when I'm exhausted. But then when the pendulum swings back the other way, then I'll be in procrastination and resistance to doing anything. And so the craving for letting myself off the hook and not being on task or on purpose will keep me from moving organically back and forth. And so I'm doing particularly well when I can flow between the two states, and neither of them is fighting to stay in control when it's authentically time to move into the other one. And I just use that particular languaging. You can substitute something else, committed and open, for example. But there's a beauty in that sort of inner trust between those two aspects of myself, where I can, go sit out in nature for an hour and, watch the view. I don't do that very often. Usually, 10 minutes is a lot more approachable, but that I have that ability to move into that. And then something arises in me where I want to move or I'm inspired to do something. I really enjoy the days when my energy is up, but I'm not committed to a particular result. And I kind of just respond to everything that's talking to me. Oh yeah, I wanted to do this with the hot tub. Oh yeah, I wanted to do this little bit of adjustment in my yard. Oh yeah, I wanted to reorganize this drawer in, the kitchen. There's this ability to kind of move around and sort of putter and just be engaged with my world in a really organic kind of way, which is really nice. And so again, I think that if you are someone who is perpetually exhausted and fatigued and constantly pushing yourself for everything it feels like you need to get done, and have a stack of emotions where you'd rather do than feel something uncomfortable, which I think is a lot of the population, there can be no idea of the richness and the creativity and the feeling of getting to enjoy the sensation of life force moving through you that opens up when you get into this place of being in stillness without having a big stack of uncomfortable emotions and without being completely exhausted, having energy and going into this for the deliciousness and the richness. And some of what this gives access to is intuition and new possibilities. A lot of people are, paying attention to what I have to share because they want a fuller, deeper, more profound relationship with their intuition, their spiritual gifts, their guidance, their team of spirit guides. That's really high value for them. And there's nothing like the combination of emotional numbing and busyness and the activation of the fight or flight to ensure that you have absolutely the least possible access to those things. And so stillness and unstimulated time is really good for calming the baseline of the fight or flight response. And I enjoyed a book. It was called The Little Book of Hugin, and it was a Danish happiness researcher. And he was talking about the Danish value on coziness and peacefulness and connection, relaxed connection to people you feel really at ease with, like you can really be yourself without worrying about being judged, playing board games, reading a book by the fire. And there's not really an exact translation, but in American culture, and I think in some of the other cultures that I'm more familiar with, there's a lot of capitalism that is selling us stimulation. So we have foods that are, stimulating pleasure centers in our brain, even as they're not providing the best nutrition. If you know, have a more balanced relationship, you can certainly get, incredible pleasure from food that is really supportive for you. But there's a biochemical hack in a lot of the processed foods that releases pleasurable brain chemistry. And the movies that we're watching, there's just a lot of being marketed to, that is designed to stimulate our brain chemistry. And we're buying stimulation and distraction a lot of the time, and numbing strategies. And I'm definitely not against that. I think that sometimes the most restful thing you could do is binge something on Netflix. If you need your brain to just have a break from being intensely engaged, I'm all in favor of that. So I don't want to imply, never eat sugar or never binge something on TV or those kind of things. But what I would love to offer is that there's something incredibly restorative to our resilience and our resourcefulness and our connection to spirit and our inner wisdom and our perspective and soothing of the emotions and easing anxiety and the physical health that we're enjoying, if we have time where we're not experiencing a lot of activation of our senses or a lot of activation of our inner world. So one of the things that I think is accessible through this sort of being and this stillness and the deliciousness, the Hugin, as this, word that we don't quite have in English describes it, is getting to access pleasure in a way that doesn't have a negative effect. So again, I'm not against having a glass of wine, but if you drink to excess, that's going to put a toll on your body. Or, there's a lot of chemicals that are very pleasing about smoking a cigarette, but those are hard on your lungs. And likewise with sugar or online shopping, or sometimes, Facebook, it's really hacking our circuits that reward us for connection, because that's a really good survival thing, but it can leave us feeling more lonely and isolated in comparison to other people, which, doesn't tend to bring out feelings of well-being. And again, to be clear, I'm not saying delete your Facebook account. I'm just offering that in addition to Facebook and Netflix and a glass of wine and a really good piece of chocolate, that you can find ways of activating pleasure that are more about the depth of what your soul loves about being incarnate on earth. And that kind of pleasure is a really different flavor than the biochemical pleasure that happens. And sometimes it can be a little bit hard to tease them apart. You get out some sunshine when you haven't had enough sunshine and you're like, oh, my mood is through the roof. And that could be soul pleasure, but also really, biochemistry of something that is super helpful for you. If you weren't getting enough vitamin D because you weren't getting enough sun and suddenly you're like, oh, I feel at one with the world. It's awesome all the way around. But I think access to pleasure and bliss and joy and happiness and wonder that is cultivated, that is not biochemistry based, but is more about what moves our soul, whether, that could be the arts. I really feel this awe when I get to go to the theater of an appreciation of the wildly talented people. The kings of yesteryear didn't necessarily have access to the level of talent that living near San Diego with multiple theaters affords me. There's just such amazingly beautiful kind of things. And live theater might bore you to tears. My dad tells a story of taking my sister and I we lived up in Northern California, and there was the music circus right outside of Sacramento that was this big tent where they did musicals. And my sister was bored out of her mind and couldn't wait for intermission when she'd been promised popcorn, and she's looking at one kid that's like squirmy and grumpy and trying to count down the songs until she gets popcorn. popcorn. And then he looks at me and I'm sitting there with this huge grin on my face because I just loved it so much. He was like, all right, note to self, good investment for that child. Let's not take this one to the theater for my sister. And I think theater has grown on her over the years, but there's what moves each person can be really different, but there's an availability to that in moving out of the productive side of things. I really love the book by Elizabeth Gilbert. She's the one who did Eat, Pray, Love, but one of her newer books is called Big Magic. And she's talking about the value of living a creative life, even if it has nothing to do with what you're up to pay your bills. And there's some just really beautiful, rich wisdom, I think, in that book about, what it is to create for the sake of creating, for the joy of the communion with Source, for lack of a better term. And of course, I'm speaking from the standpoint of someone who, tends to lean toward more doing and has to wrangle myself into being. But I just want to take a moment to offer that even though it's not my journey, the converse can apply. There can be people who are, very, connected to all that is, but then there are meaningful times when being able to, be on task and commit to a result and focus and make that happen would be very, very valuable. And I think a lot of us will have a preference. We may like being over doing or doing over being. Our society is really biased toward doing. So when you're finding this out, you may have some false information because of what you were praised for and what was rewarded and what was acknowledged and what we see praised and acknowledged, as we go along. And I feel like there's a important piece of inner work, which is taking out all of the ways that our identity has been informed by trying to please the people around us or who they thought we should be. I do this as energetic extractions out of the solar plexus, and sometimes when I'm doing a soul retrieval for someone, I'll actually take a parent's blueprint for who they thought their child should be out of the field. If your parent had the, psychic ability to push that into your energy body, and we sort of absorb culture at large. And I think it's just an important thing all the way around. As someone in a female body, I'm constantly cleaning out absorbed, misogynistic information. It's not that I have men in my life who hate women or a lot of overt sexism. It's just more that there's this cultural ideas that are very easy to absorb that would make my value have to do with my physical appearance, which is an absurd idea when you say it out loud and start to look at it, but it can be really, really in there and pervasive. And likewise, I think your value is tied to your achievements and what you accomplish. I don't know. I remember being at a camping event with someone, and a few days in, she said, "Wow, I like you so much better than I thought I was going to." We didn't know each other very well. We'd passed in community, hadn't really ever had a conversation. And I'm like, huh. And it was said so kindly that I wasn't even like, oh, this feels like it could be ouchy. I'm like, oh, really? Why is that? And she said, well, I thought you were going to talk shamanism the whole time, and I don't think you've brought it up yet. And I said, well, yeah, because nobody's asked me about it. I mean, that's work. I'm here with community, just enjoying being with people. And I was just really responding to each interaction and what was available. And there were hot pools, natural mineral springs, which I loved. And so I was soaking and I was chatting, and I didn't have anything to prove. I wasn't trying to be seen or build status. And this was someone who mostly probably knew me through Facebook, and I use Facebook to advertise my events. So I can easily understand why she would, have the notion, hey, this gal never shuts up about shamanism. She goes on and on and on. And I certainly do, but I try to do it in consensual ways. If you didn't want to hear me go on and on and on, you would have turned off this podcast presumably long ago, unless you're, being made to listen to it by someone else, in which case I'm really sorry. That's no fun at all. But in general, that there's this feeling like the higher perceived social value and status we have, the more people will like us. And people are more interested often in being made to feel safe and seen and connected with. And there's a lot of connection that happens when you're not trying to establish your social value. And so that's just kind of an extraction of this notion that people will like you better if you're more impressive. That actually, tends to grate on the nerves of a lot of people, the kind of name dropping and status signaling that people do. It doesn't tend to feel good, even if people are impressed or drawn to it. There's a lot of tension, I think, in the bodies of people who are in that kind of environment and in that kind of energy. Often alcohol flows really freely in those situations, I think, to kind of offset the tension. So in any case, I just want to invite you to, start kind of cleaning out this notion that what you achieve is your value. There are lots of good reasons to work hard and achieve things. There are many things that we can be really committed to. And I still work in really focused ways and really passionately and on things that won't necessarily make me any money, but might help somebody to have a better, happier life, because that feels amazing to me. I absolutely love getting to do that. So giving up overachieving for perceived social value doesn't mean that you won't be inspired or engaged or in flow state or deeply immersed in something. It's just noticing when you're whipping yourself and you're driving yourself for some kind of external thing that you took on that isn't really your own. And consider that, you may want to come into better relationship with whichever side of that is a little out of balance. So if you're more of a doer and an achiever, you may want to cultivate your ability for stillness and presence. And if you're more of a, person who just likes a lot of stillness, hangs in the woods for long periods of time, goes on walks in nature, I think that's awesome. I really appreciate those qualities. But you're not engaging in the world in some ways that might be important and useful and give you some aspects and experiences in life that might be really significant. That's something to look at as well. And if you're somebody who has a lot of really strong pendulum swings where you go one way to an extreme and then the other way to an extreme, which I have certainly done, that middle ground where you don't stay in one so long, that you're more available to, accomplish some stuff and then rest and, and be open. And again, I really want to emphasize that the connection to the guides and the profound inspiration and the creativity and the new possibilities really come from that neutral stillness where you're not committed to a result, you're not emotional, your instincts aren't activated, you're relaxed, there isn't tension in your body, and you're in a fairly good space with the world. There's this incredible access that lands in your lap. People are using, fasting and vision quests and, these kind of severe physical things to get connected, which you can totally do. If you want to go fast in the desert, be very careful. Don't, take good care of your body. But there's an access of well-being and lack of stress that is incredibly potent for connecting with source, and I would love to point you in that direction. And if you're somebody who's just still in the journey of getting less busy and finding the emotional stack that you've been numbing and sorting through that, I commend you. That is brave and vulnerable work, and it's powerful, but it can be really, really tough. I just want to show you the territory on the other side that is on the other side of it. There's delicious, quiet relationship with yourself. I really like my own company. I just genuinely enjoy hanging out in my home by myself. And that wasn't true in the same way when I was younger. There was a lot of self-talk that was pretty harsh and pretty uncomfortable. And so I really want to kind of be the map maker who brings back the map and says, hey, there may be this really delicious territory that you haven't experienced. And a lot of what I'm working with now in my life is remembering what I know about that so that I create these times that give me the most access. I mentioned the mastermind, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of content, but just choosing to evoke that, I went and sat in the hot tub and had a ton of new ideas that felt really congruent with who I am and ways that I could move my business and contribute new things. And so there was just this like, oh, you're interested in that? Boom, here's a lot of possibilities that really come in. Yeah, so lots of cool stuff, pleasure and meaning and availability for connection. This more still, non-agendaed relating tends to create more depth and intimacy with other people. So there's just a whole lot of benefits that really are going to come: physical health, emotional well-being, psychological well-being, spiritual well-being, access to source, unconditional friendliness towards self. There's a lot of really good stuff, but it is on the other side of that territory of resting enough to not be tired, and then being willing to experience stillness from that place and cleaning out emotional debt, emotions that you haven't processed, so that you can, not have a highly activated emotional state. It really can be a state of reduced stimulation in terms of mental talk, in terms of emotional stimulation. And there's a lot of what's beautiful and rich and meaningful in the world that can be found in the subtle. And many people are missing the subtle because they're responding to the loudness and filling their space in one way or another with a lot of noise and intensity and stimulation. So I am excited to get to offer this, and I really hope that there's some value for you in here somewhere. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.